Larry. 25 minutes before 11 o'clock. Wow, has it been 25 years since Hurricane Andrew? That's just hard to believe.
Gosh, I know.
I remember I was doing a radio broadcast at a different radio station, and we had a horse, what do you call it, handicapper for the horse races that would come on the air with us every afternoon. He was like a 5-minute segment he did. And this guy knew his horses, and when Hurricane Andrew came through, he had these horror stories because he drove down there after the fact and was helping out with some of the horse-related, I don't know, horse industry people, I don't know. And there was actually, he had one story of a horse, a dead horse, in a tree.
Yeah.
In a tree.
Wow.
That hurricane really showed us that we really need to be better prepared. And you know what? One of the ways we become prepared is when we find out in advance that it's coming our way and that it is something we should be concerned about. That information was not always available to us. In fact, I remember learning that Benjamin Franklin was the one who said, I think this weather starts down the road and doesn't form right over our heads. It's
right.
It's moving. And understanding that it moves and then figuring out how to track it and how to see in advance where it might hit, it's so important. And yet we don't always pay attention. We got the access. I have a confession to make. I steal the weather. When you hear me telling you the weather forecast, I'm getting it from someplace else. The real heroes in all of the weather stories are the weathermen, and Bryan Norcross is one of those guys who made a big difference prior to Hurricane Andrew because he saw it. He saw something out there. The rest of us would have said, it's a bunch of clown. Nothing. Don't worry about it. It rains all the time in Florida.
He's amazing.
He's written a book about his experience 25 years ago called My Hurricane Andrew Story. It is a story of preparation, terror, and resilience by the man who talked South Florida through the hurricane of 1992. If you're looking at the streaming video, I've got the cover of the book instead of our mugs. Good morning, Bryan. What an honor to have you on our show.
Thank you, Larry. Good morning.
We all steal from you. You know that, don't you?
Yeah. I got that idea.
But in my case, I'll tell you the truth. I mean, I was always saying where I was getting the information from. If I was looking at you on the weather feed or whatever we had going at that time, technology has changed so much. I don't even think we had the internet back then, did we?
No.
No, I don't think we did.
No.
So tell me your story and why 25 years later are you telling the story?
Well, I've had this story in my head for a long time, and I just decided that 25 years was going to be a good time to look back at Andrew. It has such a legacy and is so important to how we deal with hurricanes today. The building codes, for example, across the state of Florida really came out of Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah.
In southeast Florida, in Miami-Dade and Broward County, it's an extremely strong building code. It's too bad it's not so strong across the state, but still the state of Florida building code is significantly improved than it was in the sort of patchwork situation we had before Hurricane Andrew. But you have all these outcomes, including the changes in insurance and the way government deals with hurricanes. It all came out of Hurricane Andrew. So, even today we deal with it, but the big thing is that there are so many lessons to learn. A lot of hurricanes have happened in the meantime, but nothing has happened like Hurricane Andrew. Most of the hurricanes that have affected Florida over the years since 1992 affected most people as a Category 1 hurricane or a strong tropical storm. Few people got stronger than that, but not many. So the people in the state that kind of feel like, oh boy, I went through those hurricanes in 2004 and 2005, really didn't go through anything like Hurricane Andrew. And I just think it's important for everybody to understand what they've experienced and what they haven't experienced. And since they live in Florida, what we need to be ready for. We need to be ready for extreme hurricanes, not the more kind of garden variety, but very damaging ones that we had over and over again, seems like, about 10 years ago. Yeah,
the hurricane party is an interesting phenomenon, and I'm probably just as guilty of it as anybody else. But you mentioned 2004, and I there's nothing I can say other than I'm sure that was weak compared to Hurricane Andrew and Hurricane Katrina. But it was the strongest one I had ever been through. And as I prepared for, there was like 4 that year.
There was 4 that
so
year,
there were
back
2
to
that
back.
came through our area. And anyway, so one of them, I remember thinking, oh, cool, I've never actually been through a hurricane. Here it comes. Can't wait to see it. And you know what? I was so wrong. It was like the stupidest thing to be excited about a hurricane. I mean, I was so scared when the wind was blowing down my street and it looked like trees were just going to be uprooted. And in that case, fortunately, it didn't happen on my street, but it happened all over town. The next morning, I drove around town and they were everywhere. So I can only imagine what it was like during Andrew.
Yeah, so I'm sure that in Ocala you had power out, and it took some time to get it back on. But if you can imagine, in Deep South Dade and Andrew, the power was out for 3 months.
Wow!
And in large suburban parts of Miami, it was out for 3 and 4 weeks. So, and we're talking about August in Florida, right?
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't like after Hurricane Wilma that came through South Florida, where it happened in late October, and after Wilma, it was relatively cool. After Andrew, it was broiling hot and steamy, and then torrential rain came. So you had this I said in the book that Mother Nature just would not let up on South Dade, that people were out just trying to put some semblance of order back in their neighborhood and get the trees off their houses and off their cars, and the destroyed furniture out to the curb, and the carpets out to the curb that were all soaking wet. So they had some corner of the house that would be dry, and they put tarps on the roofs, and then windy rains came later that week for day after day, and blew all the tarps off. And you had once again everything that was left just sopping wet by that following weekend. So I mean, it was hell on earth down there in the southern part of Dade County. And yeah, you're right, Larry. Nobody that really thinks of hurricanes as an adventure really thinks it through clearly. And Hurricane Andrew was really the extreme example of that. And that, to get back to your first question, I just thought that story needed to be told. People really needed to feel and understand what an amazing, extreme, epic, horrendous event that it was for the hundreds of thousands of people that were right in the middle of it.
And there were some homes and businesses that were literally gone. So even though these people's lives were saved, they had no place to go.
Yeah, you had 26,000 homes destroyed. Another 100,000 damaged.
Wow.
And around 40,000 businesses were put out of commission, either destroyed or out of commission. So
that is amazing.
You had, those kind of numbers. I mean, those are good-sized cities completely destroyed.
So your job as a meteorologist is to see something coming before it gets there, and then to warn the people in the community. How seriously did the listeners and the viewers take your warning? I mean, were they evacuating? Did they get it? Did they understand that this was going to be horrible?
Well, they understood by the day before it hit that it was going to be a bad hurricane. You can't live in Florida in general and not kind of be aware there's a hurricane threat, but especially in the Miami area. I mean, Miami has a long history of hurricanes. But nobody really had in their mind, including me, and I've studied Miami hurricanes extensively, and there's a long history here of really strong, damaging hurricanes that have come through the city, but not in the modern city. We're talking about in the first half of the 20th century, up into the 60s is when the hurricanes used to happen here frequently. So the idea of this of a really strong hurricane coming through a modern city, I could only sort of visualize, and even I didn't have any comprehension of what the Category 5 hurricane would mean, and that hundreds of thousands of people would be buried in a closet in their house under mattresses as their houses were coming apart around them, and really terrorized at a level that I didn't imagine. So people were prepared by the time that Sunday night came, and the hurricane was going to happen overnight into Monday morning. People were in their position thinking, okay, we've taken our steps, we're good to go here. There was no traffic on the road, things were calm, and people were ready, but nobody was ready for what happened.
And even emergency management seemed kind of hampered by that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you an example, Miami-Dade, or at that time Dade County Emergency Management, had this shelter out there. It was an old civil defense building that was not going anywhere in the hurricane, but their phone lines were not set up so that if they got overwhelmed, they would still have outgoing phone lines. So many people were calling emergency management, and actually the 911 system overflowed into their building. So many people were making incoming calls that you couldn't get an outgoing line. And they were tremendously hampered by being unable to communicate. And we had cell phones at the time, mobile phones, but inside that bunker building, they didn't work. So they were just, they learned monstrous communications lessons during Andrew. And then you had the whole problem of the Florida governor was Lawton Charles at the time. He didn't really know how to trigger the federal response. The people in Washington were waiting on the right paperwork, and they weren't sure if they could respond before they actually did a survey. And so you had both at the federal level and the state level just kind of dysfunction. And then finally, 4 days after the storm hit, so people had been left alone really with looters and just chaos for all those days. The director of Dade County Emergency Management, Kate Hale, went on television and said, I hate to criticize people that we need to help us, but where are they? They promised help. They send help everywhere else, but why can't they come help us? Anyway, it became politically impalatable for President Bush, who was running for re-election at the time. And, he said to the Army, go down there and solve this. And so a day later they did, and on the 6th day after Andrew, the military was in place providing security. It took that long for it to get help.
You were on TV, and you had some calls come in the book. I'm just referring part of the book. The calls were put on the air, and these people were in a panic. Can you tell us some of those stories?
Sure. So what was happening as this storm was going on? We were really kind of cut off from information, except for we stayed in touch with the National Hurricane Center until the radar blew off the roof of the Hurricane Center and smashed on the building, and then we were out of communications there for a while. But then finally we heard back that they were all okay. But our crews were all hunkered down in shelters, and we had no information until finally, about an hour and a half after the hurricane really started, and it was just whipping and ripping through houses. We got some calls in from one part of Kendall, and Kendall is a large suburb southwest of downtown Miami. And in the first two cases, they were both young female voices. One of them I met after the fact, and she had to be 16, something like that.
Oh, really?
And she was there with her family. For whatever reason, and I don't recall why it was that they asked her to call, but she got a call through to the TV station, and we put her on the air, and with the fear in her voice, she was telling us that she was with her family in the bathroom, and her father and her brothers were trying to hold the bathroom door as it was bowing in the wind.
Wow.
And what should they do? And
wow.
And I told him, I said, you've got to stay right there, and you've got to get your whole family on that door, and because that's your protection against this storm, and you got to stick together, and you're just going to have to stick it out, and you've got a good ways to go. And they actually had another hour to an hour and a half to go before that was going to let up. And another very young voice called, and they were in the bedroom in a similar situation, and part of the roof had come off the house at the other end of the house, and they wanted to know whether they should go out of the bedroom and try and go to another place in the house. And I said, boy, we don't know what's really out there. We don't know what's blowing around. We don't know what part of the roof is coming off. I said, if you're safe where you are, then just hold that door and
Wow.
stay away from the windows and protect yourself. So yeah, it was harrowing, and that was back in the days of landlines. Those folks, everything else was coming apart, but their old landlines still worked. Which we don't generally have anymore. We have these cable home phones sometimes. Mm-hmm. But most people just have cell phones, and cell phones don't work in situations like this.
We hear so often about the barometric pressure changes that can implode a home, and part of the lessons learned from Hurricane Andrew were people who experienced that very thing. What in the event of this happening to any of us? What is the advice? Is it open the window, close the window? What is the advice?
Yeah, that's that whole thing about the barometric pressure is understandable, but it's not true. The thing that destroys a home is the wind getting inside the home and pressurizing the home. So you want to keep all the windows and doors closed and secure, and that's why you put shutters on the windows and doors. And if the door swings in, you do everything you can to put multiple locks on it to make it not break at the latch. The reason that people feel like that the barometric pressure is involved is because as this pressure drops in the hurricane, it really drops quickly. It's very much like going up in a very tall building in a very fast elevator, and your ears start popping, and you can really feel it inside your body, because the air that's trapped inside your body is trying to get out into the lower pressure, and you have all this internal pressure in your ears and even other parts of your body. Your body can actually ache from that pressure change, that rapid pressure change. So that's why people think that the house is somehow getting pressurized, or the low pressure is doing it, but it's actually the air getting inside the house and putting upward pressure on the roof from the inside that causes roofs to fail. So the main thing you want to do is to keep the wind outside. So that's why shutters and strong windows and doors are a huge part of making homes inhabitable after big hurricanes come through.
And that was another lesson, was the building code. We just had two ladies here from Habitat for Humanity, and this subject came up, and it seemed like the Habitat for Humanity homes were standing more so than the other homes. So South Florida learned from that also.
Yeah, absolutely. The homes that were built right, the thing is, the Habitat for Humanity homes are built very solidly. They're not big fancy houses, but they're built very solidly. And the building code in Dade County at the time of Andrew was a very good building code. But the thing was that through the 80s, it got very lax, and the building department came in for all kinds of criticism, which was very, very well deserved, because they didn't enforce the building code. And builders kind of built whatever they wanted. They built homes that would have been built in Georgia or somewhere out of the hurricane zone. So you had that problem. But you also had the fact that Andrew was so extreme that even well-built homes that just had some flaw, for example, they had shutters, but the shutters weren't mounted with really strong anchors into the house, and Andrew just blew the shutters off the windows and then blasted through the windows.
And
so the new building code requires everything not just be strong, but be mounted strongly, and there are very, very strong prescriptions for all of that to try and fill in every loophole that Andrew revealed.
And there wasn't the powerhouse down there also at that time, and that was even hit.
Yeah, everything was it. So, there's a nuclear power plant
Yeah.
in extreme South Dade, and the center of Andrew came ashore just north of Turkey Point Nuclear Power Plant. Well, the power plant, the nuclear side of it, was shut down that evening, really just a few hours before the hurricane hit. The protocols cut things very finely. But the power plant... the thing that saved the power plant is the generators that were on that location continued to work and keep the cooling going when they lost their external power. The power lines that come in for FPL actually failed fairly early in the storm, so they were relying on local generators. Well, everything else in that power plant outside of the nuclear building was really substantially wrecked. And thankfully, nothing fell in those generators to knock them out, or it would have been Fukushima. That's what happened in Fukushima in Japan after the tsunami, was they lost their generators because they didn't mount their generators high enough to keep the tsunami wave away from the generators. Well, in Turkey Point, the generators, they had all kinds of things. They had a water tower fall on top of equipment, but luckily nothing fell on those generators and incapacitated them. So Turkey Point became kind of a footnote in the Andrew story because it wasn't a cataclysm there. But if you could imagine a nuclear accident in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
I mean, it's like this, apocalyptic kind of thing.
Bryan Norcross is our guest. Bryan, I didn't correctly introduce you, or properly, I should say, the senior hurricane specialist for the Weather Channel. And how did your home fare? Was your home there? Were you at home?
Well, I was in the TV station. My home was in Coconut Grove, and Coconut Grove is immediately south of downtown Miami. The center of Andrew came in about 15 miles south, so it was very eerie in my neighborhood. I mean, the foliage was all damaged. The trees were ripped to shreds. I had a few tiles off, decorative tiles really, off the peak of the roof on my house, but I had shutters. It was a mess, but everything was fine. And in the week, actually, I didn't really get to cleaning up until about a week after the storm, but all of us in our neighborhood really felt guilty because it was only about 5 miles south that people's homes were destroyed.
Wow. It's an amazing story. And I know you played a major role for a lot of people who were just needing a little comfort, and it's amazing how the media, the radio, the TV, etc., makes that difference. I have one quick story about Robin and I. We don't know anything about weather, everything, and I'm not kidding. Whenever we have weather, it's us stealing from you. We always tell people that. Okay, but the thing is this, when we had our power outages, we had a few days without power, and I guess this was 2004, I felt like we were so incompetent and inadequate, and we weren't doing anything. The good thing, and I think this applies to you way more than it does to us, people were saying, you know what, it was just nice to have you on the air because it's like there's a friend there when you don't feel like there's anybody there. And I'm sure that's the same thing people feel watching you and the Weather Channel.
Yeah, well, two things about that in Andrew. One is, think back 3 years before Andrew, there was Hurricane Hugo, which is this monstrous hurricane that hit just north of Charleston, South Carolina. Well, all of the Charleston media went off the air. They actually signed off because their studios were in the evacuation zone.
Oh, man.
Wow.
The only thing that stayed on was one suburban daytime AM station actually was able to stay on the air, and they did their best. But most people had no communications during Hugo. So when I was up there after Hugo and really talked to those folks, and so when it came time to prepare the television station in Miami for the storm, I said, we need a secure line to the radio station. So I made a deal with one of the FM stations here, and I went up to visit them and finalize the deal. And I look outside the building. I tell this story in the book, and they're right on the water in Fort Lauderdale. And I said, well, wait a minute. If we have a hurricane, they're going to get evacuated, and they're not going to be a good partner because our TV studio was on high ground in downtown Miami. And so I said, let's run a dedicated line to their transmitter, which is well inland, and then a separate line to their studio. And that line was tested 1 week before Hurricane Andrew. The engineers got it installed and tested. And that Sunday, the day before Andrew hit, the radio station engineer took that dedicated line from the phone company and just hooked it into their transmitter. And that's how we were on the radio through Hurricane Andrew, and that's how people in the dark, as their homes were coming apart, actually had some connection with the outside world. So you're absolutely right. It's just hard to imagine what it would be like having no knowledge of what's going on, in the world in general, while your house is being ripped apart and it's pitch black.
Yeah.
And
Bryan,
all you can do is hear it.
Bryan, I don't know if you realize this, but it's an honor to have you on our show. Thank you for doing this, taking your time to be on with us. Thank you for what you've chosen to do for a career. For everybody else, the book is called My Hurricane Andrew Story. Go to the web and get it. It's by Bryan Norcross. I found it on Amazon. You got 5-star ratings. Do you have any other websites you want to send us to?
Yeah, you can go to Amazon and just put in My Hurricane Andrew Story or myhurricaneandrewstory.com. Either one.
Okay.
It'll just take you to Amazon as well.
All right, Bryan, thank you so much for being on the air with us today.
Thank you, Larry and Robin, both.
All right, we will be right back.
Pay your taxes, eat your vegetables, watch your weight, mow the lawn, clean the house. We all have stuff we don't want to do. Isn't it about time you did something you wanted to do? Like getting your pilot's license? At Ocala Aviation, they make it fun and easy, and you can start by taking one of their discovery flights. For only $99, you get to go up in the airplane with an FAA-certified flight instructor and actually fly the plane yourself. It's a perfect way to see if flying is for you. And once you get that ultimate feeling of freedom, Ocala Aviation can train you to get your pilot's license. Ocala Aviation also offers commercial flight training for those looking to make a career change and enter the world of commercial aviation. Ocala Aviation is conveniently located at the Ocala International Airport. So if you're ready to start your adventure, stop by or give them a call today. 861-7484. That's 861-7484. You'll be glad you did. I know I am. Ocala Aviation. Call today. 861-7484. Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Here is your 30-second news brief. A home intruder was shot and killed Monday night in Summerfield. The Marion County NAACP is renewing its call for the removal of Confederate symbols from government property. A study by the University of Florida concluded that sea level rise on Florida's coast is the result of El Nino and the North Atlantic Oscillation and not climate change. And while license plate frames are common in Florida, the Highway Patrol says they are illegal. The fine is $114. That is your news brief from The Source.
Some tips on how to preserve all of those fresh herbs that you grow. That's coming up on This Land of Ours.
It's time to rethink what you know about clean American propane and what it can do for your operation. Want efficient, reliable power independent of the grid? Propane can do that. Power for EPA-compliant engines without all the extra fluids and filters? Propane can do that. Eliminate fuel theft, lower hourly fuel costs, reduce downtime. Propane can do all of that. Discover all the things propane can do on your farm at propanecandothat.com.
This report brought to you by your beef checkoff. Get to know how your checkoff helps build consumer demand at mybeefcheckoff.com.
If you grow your own fresh herbs, cook with them, but find that you have way more than you can eat and keep, then you may want to try